Mark Bell settled into the plush seat of business class, his tracksuit a stark contrast to the tailored suits around him, but the weight of a long flight shift still clung to his bones. The flight attendant's smile froze as she approached, her eyes narrowing with a suspicion that made his gut twist. Not again. The cabin of Flight 237 hummed with the low murmur of passengers boarding, their voices mingling with the clink of glasses and the rustle of carry-ons. Mark, a 38-year-old black man with a lean frame and a quiet confidence, adjusted his noise-canceling headphones, trying to sink into the rare luxury of being a passenger instead of the pilot. His tracksuit, navy with a small airline logo embroidered on the chest, was comfortable, chosen for the long flight home to Chicago after a grueling transatlantic shift. He'd flown this plane, a Boeing 787, from London to New York just hours ago, and now he was deadheading back, blending in with the crowd. Or so he thought. The flight attendant, a woman in her late 20s with a tight blonde bun and a name tag reading Claire, approached his row. Her smile was professional but brittle, like glass about to crack. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice clipped. "This is business class. Can I see your boarding pass?" Mark's jaw tightened, but he kept his tone even, pulling the pass from his pocket. "Here you go." He handed it over, his eyes meeting hers, calm but searching. He'd been here before. Too many times. The skeptical looks, the subtle accusations, the assumption that he didn't belong. Claire scanned the pass, her lips pursing. The boarding pass was valid, his name clear. Mark Bell, Seat 3A, business class. But her eyes flicked back to him, lingering on his tracksuit, his sneakers, the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw. "This doesn't seem right," she said, louder now, drawing glances from nearby passengers. "Can you confirm your identity?" Mark's fingers twitched, but he kept his hands still, resting on his lap. "It's my seat," he said, his voice low, steady, the kind of calm that came from years of navigating tense cockpits and turbulent skies. "I'm just heading home." Claire's smile vanished. "Sir, I need you to cooperate. If you can't prove this is your seat, I'll have to ask you to move." Her tone was sharp now, authoritative, and the passengers around them began to whisper, their eyes darting between Mark and Claire. A man in a pinstripe suit across the aisle smirked, pulling out his phone, the faint click of a camera shutter audible. Mark's chest tightened, a familiar anger simmering beneath his calm. He'd flown planes worth hundreds of millions, navigated storms over the Atlantic, landed with zero visibility. But here, in a seat he'd earned, he was just another suspicious face. "I've shown you my boarding pass," he said, his voice still even but firmer now. "That's enough." Claire's eyes narrowed and she stepped back, raising her radio. "Security, we have a situation in business class. Passenger refusing to cooperate." The words hit like a slap, and the cabin fell silent, all eyes on Mark. A woman in the row behind clutched her purse, her expression a mix of fear and judgment. The man with the phone was recording now, his smirk wider. Mark leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment, his mind flashing to his first day as a pilot 10 years ago. The pride of his uniform, the weight of the wings pinned to his chest, the dream he'd fought for through years of flight school, loans, and late nights. He'd known then that the skies weren't equal, not for someone who looked like him. But he hadn't expected it to follow him here, into a seat he'd earned. "Sir, I need you to step into the aisle," Claire said, her voice trembling slightly now, as if she sensed the growing tension. Two security officers appeared at the front of the cabin, their uniforms crisp, their hands resting on their belts. The older one, a stocky man with a buzz cut, looked at Mark with a practiced neutrality. "We need to see some ID," he said, his tone clipped. Mark exhaled, reaching into his backpack. He could feel the weight of every stare, the silent judgments piling up. He pulled out his wallet, his fingers brushing against his airline ID, the one that listed his title, Captain Mark Bell, Senior Pilot. He hesitated, the urge to flash it now, to shut this down, warring with the part of him that wanted to stay calm, to not escalate. "Here's my driver's license," he said, handing it over. The officer glanced at it, then at Claire. "This checks out. What's the issue?" "He doesn't look like he belongs here," Claire said, her voice low but audible, her eyes flicking to Mark's tracksuit. "He's being uncooperative." The words stung, sharp and familiar. Mark's jaw clenched, but he kept his gaze steady, his voice low. "I've shown you my boarding pass. I've shown you my ID. I'm not the problem here." The second officer, younger, with a nervous energy, shifted his weight. "Let's just de-escalate this, sir. Step into the galley with us. Mark's heart pounded, but he stood, his movements deliberate, controlled. He towered over Claire, not in aggression, but in presence, his calm a stark contrast to her flushed cheeks. The cabin was a sea of eyes, phones raised, capturing every moment. He followed the officers to the galley, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his mind racing. Not today, he thought, not like this. In the galley, the older officer crossed his arms. Look, we don't want trouble. Just explain why you're in that seat. Mark's hand hovered over his airline ID again, but he paused. He could end this now, reveal who he was, watch Claire's face collapse. But something held him back, pride maybe, or the knowledge that proving himself wouldn't erase the humiliation. I'm a passenger, he said simply. I paid for my seat. That's all you need to know. Claire hovered nearby, her arms crossed, her confidence faltering. He's acting suspicious, she insisted, her voice quieter now, as if she sensed the tide shifting. The older officer sighed, handing Mark's license back. All right, let's get this sorted. Stay here. He stepped away to radio the gate agent, leaving Mark with the younger officer and Claire. The galley felt claustrophobic, the hum of the plane's engines a low roar in Mark's ears. He leaned against the counter, his mind drifting to his daughter, waiting at home, her gap-toothed smile the reason he pushed through days like this. Claire avoided his gaze, fussing with a tray of coffee cups. You should have just cooperated, she muttered, barely audible. Mark's eyes flicked to her, sharp but controlled. I did, he said, his voice like steel. You didn't listen. The cabin lights dimmed as the plane prepared for takeoff, and Mark felt the weight of the moment settle over him. He wasn't just a passenger now. He was a spectacle, a story unfolding in real time, captured by a dozen phone cameras. And somewhere, deep down, he knew this wasn't over. Not yet. The pressure in the galley was suffocating, a microcosm of the world outside, systems, assumptions, power stacked against him. Mark Bell stood in the narrow space, his back against the counter, the hum of the Boeing 787's engines vibrating through his bones. The younger security officer lingered nearby, his hand still on his belt, while Claire busied herself with trays, avoiding his gaze. The older officer hadn't returned yet, and the delay was stretching, the cabin's murmurs growing louder. Mark could feel the weight of every stare from the business-class passengers, their phones still raised, recording, judging, waiting for the next act in this unfolding drama. Mark's mind churned. He'd faced this before, suspicion, dismissal, the assumption that he didn't belong. It started in flight school, when instructors questioned his math skills despite his perfect scores. It followed him to his first job at a regional airline, where colleagues whispered about diversity hires. Even as a captain, with thousands of flight hours and a spotless record, he'd catch passengers' surprised glances when he stepped out of the A cockpit in his uniform. But this was new. Humiliated on his own plane, the one he'd flown just hours ago, his authority stripped away by a flight attendant's snap judgment. He shifted his weight, his fingers brushing the airline ID in his pocket. It would be so easy to pull it out, to end this farce. But every time he reached for it, something stopped him. Pride, maybe, or the bitter knowledge that proving himself wouldn't undo the sting of Claire's words. He doesn't look like he belongs here. Those words echoed a lifetime of slights, each one a small cut, building to a wound he'd learned to carry. Quietly, the galley curtain rustled, and a passenger, a middle-aged woman with a designer scarf, peeked in, her phone angled for a better shot. Is everything okay? She asked, her tone more curious than concerned. Claire glanced at her, then at Mark, her face flushing. It's under control, Claire said, her voice tight. Please return to your seat. The woman hesitated, her eyes lingering on Mark, then retreated, her phone still recording. Mark's jaw clenched. He wasn't just a man now. He was a viral moment, a hashtag waiting to happen. He could already see the headlines. Black passenger accused of stealing seat on flight. His daughter Maya would see it. His mother, who'd worked double shifts to pay for his flight school, would see it. The thought made his stomach churn. The older officer returned, his face grim. Gate agent confirmed the boarding pass is valid, he said, his tone softer now, almost apologetic. You're clear to return to your seat, Mr. Bell. Mark nodded, but he didn't move. And her? He asked, tilting his head toward Claire. She called you because of how I look. What happens now? The officer's face tightened, caught between protocol and the truth. "We'll handle it," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Claire's hands froze on the tray, her knuckles white. She didn't speak, but her eyes darted to the officer, pleading for rescue. Mark's gaze held hers, steady, unflinching. "I've flown this plane," he said, his voice low, deliberate. "I've landed it in storms you can't imagine. And you think I don't belong in that seat?" Claire's face crumpled, her confidence evaporating. I was just doing my job," she stammered, but the words sounded hollow, even to her. "Your job," Mark repeated, his voice barely above a whisper, "is to treat people like people." The younger officer shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his partner. "Let's wrap this up," he muttered. "Plane's got to push back." Mark grabbed his backpack, his movements slow, deliberate. He could feel the weight of the moment, the eyes still watching, the phones still recording. As he stepped out of the galley, the cabin's hum grew louder, passengers whispering, some openly staring. The man in the pinstripe suit was still filming, his smirk replaced by a flicker of unease. Mark didn't look at him. He didn't need to. He could feel the shift, the subtle change in the air, the moment when doubt crept into their assumptions. Back in his seat, Mark stared out the window, the tarmac blurring into a gray haze. His mind drifted to his past, the years that had forged him. Growing up in a Chicago suburb where his mother cleaned houses to keep the lights on. The library books he'd devoured on aerodynamics, the nights spent studying while his friends played ball. The rejection letters from airlines, the ones that never gave a reason but always felt personal. And then, the breakthrough. His first job, his first flight, the moment he'd gripped the yoke and felt the world fall away. He'd thought the skies would be different, a place where skill trumped skin. He'd been wrong. The plane began its taxi, the engines roaring to life. Claire avoided his row, her face pale as she moved through the cabin, her usual poise gone. Mark's phone buzzed in his pocket, a notification from a friend. "Yo, you're trending. What happened?" He ignored it, his fingers brushing the airline ID again. He could have shown it in the galley, could have shut Claire down in seconds. But he hadn't. Why? Because he shouldn't have to. Because his presence, his existence, should have been enough. The cabin lights dimmed for takeoff, and Mark felt the familiar pull of the plane accelerating, the ground falling away. For a moment, he was back in the cockpit, his hands on the controls, the world bending to his will. But here, in this seat, he was just a man, judged by the color of his skin and the clothes on his back. The injustice burned, a fire he'd learned to bank but never extinguish. As the plane climbed, a passenger across the aisle, a young woman with dreadlocks and a laptop, leaned over. "I saw what happened," she said, her voice low, angry. "I posted it. People need to know." Mark met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Thanks," he said, but his tone was guarded. He didn't want this. Not the attention, not the viral storm. He just wanted to go home, to hug Maya, to sleep in his own bed. But the world had other plans. The flight landed in Chicago 2 hours later, the cabin erupting in the usual chaos of deboarding. Mark stayed in his seat, letting the others pass, their eyes lingering on him, some with curiosity, others with guilt. Claire was nowhere to be seen, likely hiding in the galley. The man in the pinstripe suit hurried off, his phone clutched tightly, no longer smirking. As Mark stepped onto the jet bridge, his phone buzzed again. More notifications, texts, a flood of mentions on X. The video had spread, clips of Claire's accusations, his calm responses, the officer's awkward retreat. Hashtags were forming, number flying while black, number justice for Mark. He silenced his phone, his jaw tight. This wasn't what he'd wanted, but it was happening, and he couldn't stop it. At the gate, a reporter was waiting, her microphone poised like a weapon. "Mr. Bell, can you comment on the incident? Are you pressing charges?" Mark's steps slowed, his backpack heavy on his shoulder. He could feel the weight of the moment, the eyes of the crowd, the cameras. His airline ID was still in his pocket, untouched. He could pull it out now, reveal the truth, watch the story explode. But he didn't. Instead, he looked at the reporter, his voice calm, steady, the same voice he used in the cockpit during a storm. "I just wanted to fly," he said, and walked away, leaving the cameras behind. The terminal was a blur of noise and light, but Mark Bell moved through it like a man in a cockpit, steady, focused, untouchable. His phone buzzed relentlessly, a storm of notifications, X posts, news alerts, messages from friends and strangers alike. The video of the incident had gone viral, clips of Claire's accusation and Mark's calm defiance racking up millions of views. Flying while black trended worldwide, with comments ranging from outrage to support to the usual venom of anonymous trolls. Mark ignored it all, his eyes fixed on the exit, where his daughter Maya was waiting with his mother, their silhouettes framed against the glass doors. He hugged Maya tightly, her small arms wrapping around his waist, her voice muffled against his chest. "Daddy, you're famous," she said, her gap-toothed grin oblivious to the weight of the moment. His mother's eyes, though, were sharper, searching his face. "You okay, baby?" she asked, her voice soft but heavy with understanding. "I'm fine, Ma," Mark said, but the words felt thin. He wasn't fine. The humiliation in the cabin, the weight of Claire's words, the cameras, it was all still there, a bruise he couldn't shake. But Maya's hand in his grounded him, pulling him back to the present. At home, he sat on the couch, Maya curled up beside him, her favorite cartoon playing softly. His mother handed him a mug of coffee, her silence louder than any question. "They're saying that flight attendant got fired," she said finally, nodding at the TV where a news ticker mentioned the incident. "People want you to speak out, do a press conference." Mark shook his head, his fingers tightening around the mug. "I don't want that," he said. "I just want to do my job." But his job wasn't simple anymore. The airline had called, their PR team in a frenzy, offering him a scripted apology, a chance to tell his story. He'd hung up. His inbox was flooded with interview requests, from local news to national outlets. Even activists reached out, urging him to sue, to demand accountability. But Mark didn't want to be a symbol. He wanted to fly. The next morning, he drove to the airline's headquarters, his uniform crisp, his captain's bars gleaming on his shoulders. The lobby was buzzing, employees glancing at him, some with respect, others with unease. He'd been summoned by the CEO, a rare meeting for a pilot, even a senior one. As he stepped into the elevator, his phone buzzed again, a text from a colleague. "Claire quit. Broke down crying on the next flight. It's all over 10. Mark's chest tightened. He didn't feel triumph, only a hollow ache. Claire's tears didn't undo her words, didn't erase the eyes of the passengers, the weight of their assumptions. But he didn't hate her. She was a product of the same system that had doubted him his whole life, the same system he'd fought to rise above. In the CEO's office, a sleek space with a view of the tarmac, Mark sat across from Ellen Hargrove, a woman with sharp eyes and a practiced smile. "Mark," she said, leaning forward, "we're horrified by what happened. We're launching an investigation, retraining our staff. We'd like you to be part of it, maybe a statement, a press conference. Show the world we're addressing this." Mark's gaze drifted to the window, where a plane was taking off, its wings slicing through the morning haze. He thought of his first solo flight, the rush of freedom, the sky stretching endless before him. He had earned that moment, just as he'd earned his seat in business class. "I don't want a press conference," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I want to fly." Hargrove's smile faltered. "You're a captain, Mark, one of our best. But this is bigger than you now. People are watching." "Then let them watch," he said, standing, his uniform a quiet declaration of who he was. "I'm not here to be your poster child. I'm here to do my job." He left the office, the weight of her words lingering but not slowing him. Outside, the tarmac was alive with planes, their engines roaring, their wings gleaming. Mark headed to the crew lounge, where his next flight awaited, a red-eye to Los Angeles. His co-pilot, a young woman named Priya, greeted him with a nod, her eyes flickering with something like awe. "Heard what happened," she said. "You handled it like a pro." Mark shrugged, checking the flight plan. "Just another day," he said, but his voice carried a quiet strength. As he stepped into the cockpit, the familiar hum of the instruments enveloped him, a sanctuary where skill trumped everything else. He settled into the captain's seat, his hands steady on the controls, the world outside falling away. The plane taxied to the runway, the cabin quiet behind him. No cameras, no accusations, just the sky ahead. As the engines roared and the plane lifted off, Mark felt the weight lift too. Not gone, but lighter, bearable. He was Captain Mark Bell, and this was where he belonged. The world could keep its hashtags, its outrage, its apologies. He had the sky. And that was enough.